In a quiet village nestled between rolling hills and flowering meadows, Isla lived a life of modesty and quiet purpose. She was a young woman whose presence carried a gentle warmth that drew others near, not through spectacle, but through the sheer calm authority of her actions. Even as a child, she had been attuned to the subtle rhythms of the earth, noticing the shifts in wind, the budding of herbs, and the soft signs of illness in both animals and people. Her hands, deft and patient, had learned to extract the healing essence from leaves, roots, and blossoms, creating tinctures and salves that could soothe burns, heal fevers, and restore strength. The villagers came to rely upon her, some secretly, others openly, for her knowledge and her uncanny ability to sense what ailments were coming before symptoms appeared. She never sought praise, and yet the gratitude in their eyes followed her quietly like shadows under the sun. Isla's home was small and unadorned, a humble dwelling at the edge of the village where herbs grew thickly in neat rows. She often rose before dawn, moving among the plants with a reverent touch, inhaling their fragrant oils and speaking to them as if they were sentient companions. Villagers whispered that she had been gifted by some unseen spirit, a protector of the land who could coax life from the soil and calm the troubled spirits of those who wandered near her door. Children, curious and shy, would approach her cautiously, receiving gentle lessons about which berries were safe to eat, which flowers could be brewed into teas, and the mysteries of moonlight on dew-laden grass. Even animals seemed to recognize her presence, drawing near without fear. A stray cat would curl around her ankles when she worked, and birds often settled nearby, watching her movements as if waiting for her next gesture. But not all eyes in the village looked upon Isla with affection. Beneath the surface of gratitude and respect, envy had begun to fester. Her intelligence, kindness, and subtle influence stirred a quiet resentment among a few powerful families who saw her as a threat to their authority and control. These families had long relied upon their status to dictate the rhythms of village life, and Isla's gentle guidance and subtle interventions disrupted the hierarchy they had carefully constructed. When she advised a farmer to plant certain herbs to prevent disease in the crops, or healed a child whom the village healer could not, whispers of jealousy took root. "Why should she know more than us?" they muttered. "Why do her remedies work when ours fail?" Isla's quiet demeanor only exacerbated their envy. She never boasted of her skill, never flaunted her successes, but the very fact that she could act without seeking recognition made them furious. They began to notice her frequent visits to families in need, her discreet aid to those who were struggling, and the unspoken trust that villagers placed in her judgment. It was not just her knowledge that unsettled them, it was the way she carried herself with a calm certainty, an inner strength that no force of ridicule or derision could shake. This made her presence even more formidable in the eyes of those who desired dominance. The seeds of animosity spread quietly at first. A wealthy landowner, whose harvest had failed despite all his efforts, began to accuse her of meddling with spirits, claiming that her remedies had brought misfortune rather than relief. His daughter, a girl of similar age to Isla but lacking her grace and tact, whispered lies to others, painting Isla's kindness as cunning manipulation. "She smiles but it hides a plan," the girl would say. "Do you not see how she lingers near those in need, yet never asks for anything in return? She gathers power quietly, weaving it into the village's veins while we remain unnoticed." A few villagers who had once sought Isla's guidance began to hesitate, influenced by the growing chorus of envy and suspicion. They questioned her intentions, wondering if her skill in herbs and healing was a gift from nature, or something darker, something that allowed her to control minds and bend fortunes. Even as her reputation as a helper and protector grew among many, a quiet faction began forming, composed of families who feared their influence waning in the face of her innate ability to inspire trust and loyalty. Isla sensed the tension but did not allow it to sway her. She continued her routines with a steady hand, tending the herbs with care, preparing salves, and offering comfort to those who came to her door. Her heart remained open, though she could not ignore the sharp glances cast by those who resented her. She noticed the subtle gestures, a family turning their backs when she approached, a hand brushing away a child she tried to soothe, whispers that stopped when she entered the room. Yet she met each slight with patience, understanding that envy could blind reason and that fear often disguised itself as hostility. The tension escalated over months. A group of villagers, emboldened by shared resentment, began discussing how they might limit her influence. "We cannot allow her to dictate who lives and who prospers in this village," one of the elder men said during a secretive meeting beneath the dim glow of lantern light. "Her remedies may heal, but they place her in a position above us all. That cannot stand." Their whispers turned to plotting as small acts of malice began. Herbs were surreptitiously removed from her garden, children were warned away from her home, and rumors spread of hidden curses and ill omens. Despite the growing hostility, Isla remained composed. Her connection to the land, her understanding of the plants and the subtle forces of nature, and her unwavering moral compass became her shield. She anticipated danger without fear, and the village itself seemed to resonate with her presence. The birds and animals remained near, the herbs continued to flourish, and those who were kind-hearted still sought her guidance. Even in the face of envy, she stood as a quiet beacon, showing that resilience and integrity could withstand the corrosive effects of jealousy. It was in this environment of rising tension that the story of Isla truly began to unfold. While she continued her work, unknown to her tormentors, the herbs and remedies she cultivated carried subtle magic. A whisper of protection, a pulse of awareness that strengthened her connection to life around her. She became more than a healer, she became an embodiment of patience, foresight, and endurance. The villagers who watched her with envy began to notice that nothing she touched faltered, and that those who sought her aid often thrived beyond expectation. Isla's story, her quiet life shadowed by envy and jealousy, sets the stage for the events to come. In the midst of daily routines, simple acts of kindness, and the gentle rhythms of village life, the simmering resentment of a few powerful families hints at the conflict that will inevitably arise. They do not yet understand the depth of her resilience or the subtle power she carries, but their intentions will soon awaken the forces that lie just beneath the surface of her calm exterior. By the time the sun rose each day and the villagers went about their tasks, Isla's presence remained a paradox, both ordinary and extraordinary. She was the girl who could heal with her hands and understand the earth as though it were a living confidant. Yet she was also the girl who inspired fear in those whose hearts were hardened by envy. In this duality lay the foundation for a tale where kindness, skill, and quiet fortitude clash with jealousy and cruelty, a tale in which the innocent, threatened yet unbowed, will demonstrate the surprising and formidable strength that comes from patience, wisdom, and harmony with the world around them. Every morning, Isla awoke with the first light brushing over the hills, spilling pale gold into her modest home. She rose with a quiet purpose, the kind that did not demand attention but radiated calm authority. Her small hearth was already warm from the coals she had banked the night before, and the air smelled faintly of dried herbs hung to cure in the rafters. She moved with measured grace, fetching water from the nearby stream, humming softly to herself in a voice that carried both joy and tranquility. Each motion was deliberate, almost ritualistic, for Isla believed that intention imbued even ordinary tasks with power. After tending the fire, she turned her attention to her neighbors. In a village where many struggled with illness or malnutrition, Isla's presence was a balm. She would carefully select herbs from her garden, grinding leaves and roots into powders, infusions, or poultices. Her knowledge was precise: chamomile for fevers, lavender for restless sleep, willow bark for pain. Yet it was not merely the technical skill that impressed the villagers. It was the care, the gentle hands that applied the remedies, and the attention to the smallest discomfort that distinguished her. Mothers would bring their children, trusting that Isla's touch could soothe more than just physical ailments. Old men, stooped with age and fatigue, would seek her counsel about minor wounds or lingering aches, and even strangers passing through the village felt compelled to stop and seek her guidance. In addition to her herbal craft, Isla tended her own sustenance with equal care. Each morning she baked bread, kneading dough until it was supple and smooth, letting the fragrance of baking fill her home and spill onto the dusty path outside. She shared these simple offerings with anyone who needed nourishment, offering a loaf here, a slice there, without expectation of reward. Her kindness extended naturally, the same way a river flows, effortless and constant. Those who received her gifts were touched not just by the bread or remedies, but by the care woven into each action. Yet her gentle presence did not go unnoticed by those who viewed it through the lens of envy. Some villagers watched her from a distance, interpreting her calm and skill as a subtle assertion of superiority. "Why should she command such trust without effort?" they whispered. A family whose crops had failed might look at Isla's flourishing herb garden with resentment, ignoring the long hours she had devoted to cultivating it. The very qualities that made her beloved, patience, attention, skill, and an unassuming dignity, provoked quiet bitterness in those who valued power, influence, and recognition over genuine virtue. Despite this simmering tension, Isla's days were filled with simple joys and responsibilities. She would rise before dawn to check on her animals, a few goats, chickens, and a solitary dog who followed her faithfully. Feeding them, brushing their coats, and ensuring they were safe was as much a part of her routine as tending the herbs or baking bread. The animals, in turn, responded to her presence with trust and affection, sensing the harmony that guided her life. When she walked through the village, Isla's demeanor reflected her inner balance. She greeted neighbors with a nod or soft word, but never with arrogance. Those who had wronged her or who whispered ill of her behind closed doors received the same polite courtesy as those who held her in high regard. Children often ran to her, laughing as she ruffled their hair or demonstrated how to care for tiny seedlings. Older villagers marveled at her attentiveness, noting how she could anticipate needs before they were voiced, an intuitive gift they could neither explain nor emulate. Even as her virtues were apparent, the envy that lingered was never far. Families whose own children were clumsy or impetuous compared them quietly to Isla's skill, murmuring that her talent was unnatural or aided by hidden forces. Some whispered superstitions, claiming she could influence outcomes with a glance or a whispered word. They misinterpreted her patience for manipulation, her foresight for planning, and her success in aiding others as a subtle undermining of their own authority. Despite this, Isla remained unshaken, her focus fixed on what was right rather than what was feared or desired by others. Her life was also marked by discipline and learning. She spent quiet afternoons documenting her remedies, sketching herbs and their effects in worn journals, and experimenting cautiously with combinations to refine their potency. This study was meticulous, reflecting her belief that knowledge was a responsibility, not a privilege. She sometimes allowed young apprentices to observe her, teaching them not only practical skills but also the ethics of care and service. Her patience was legendary. She would correct mistakes without scolding, guiding hands with a calm insistence on excellence. Throughout it all, the villagers watched. Many admired her in secret, grateful for her aid and inspired by her example. Others, driven by envy, spoke ill, concocting rumors to undermine her influence. They claimed her skill with herbs was witchcraft, her calming presence a manipulation of spirits, and her success a threat to those who sought status and recognition. And yet, even as the whispers spread, Isla's life remained steadfastly ordinary in its rhythm and extraordinary in its substance. She moved through her tasks with care, never seeking glory, never retaliating, never allowing envy to change the course of her days. Her routine, her virtues, and the quiet strength she embodied formed a shield around her. While the seeds of resentment took root among those who envied her, Isla's gentle influence continued to grow, rooted in acts of daily kindness, the integrity of her work, and the trust she earned through consistency. Those who approached her with humility and sincerity found guidance and relief. Those who approached with malice were met with calm observance, which only unnerved them further. In the patterns of her day, in the kindness extended and the care invested in every task, Isla's presence became a living testament to the power of quiet virtue. Her life was a delicate balance of service, discipline, and ethical strength, and it was this balance that made her both admired and envied. She did not seek to be noticed, and yet all who crossed her path could not help but be affected by her consistency, her competence, and the warmth of her heart. The contrast between her gentle presence and the simmering envy around her set the stage for the coming trials, where her virtues would become both shield and instrument, and where the consequences of envy would meet the enduring power of a life lived with integrity. Even as Isla continued her daily routines, the undercurrent of envy among certain villagers thickened like gathering storm clouds. It began in whispers, half-hidden murmurs as neighbors passed her on the dusty paths, eyes averted yet sharp with resentment. Why should she receive such respect? One woman hissed, clutching her basket of vegetables tighter as if protecting her own fragile pride. It is unnatural for one so young to command attention, to be sought for advice by both the young and the elders alike, another muttered, tilting her head as she watched Isla bend over a wounded child, her hands steady and unflinching. The envy was a slow-burning fire, igniting through petty acts and half-concealed malice. A family whose harvest had failed glared as Isla helped a neighbor fix a broken roof, offering her guidance and lending materials they could not afford. She flaunts her goodness, the father whispered to his son, a hardness in his voice that had been absent in their household for years. She makes us look small, our efforts useless, our influence hollow. The boy nodded, barely understanding the depth of the resentment, but willing to follow the guidance of elders whose authority he could not question. These seeds of envy took root in secret conversations, in late nights behind closed doors where candles flickered over drawn faces. The stepfather of a neighboring child, the village baker whose bread never rose as perfectly as Isla's, and even a few older women who had once been respected for their own skills, all gathered in quiet corners, speaking in tones low enough to avoid detection but sharp enough to sting with accusation. "She does not belong," they said. Her gifts are dangerous. One day they will overshadow all of us. We cannot let her continue unchecked. Their eyes flicked toward the windows of her home, the path she walked each morning, and even to the small garden where herbs thrived under her careful hands. Every detail of her life seemed to them a provocation, a reminder of their own inadequacies and failures. Motivation intertwined with envy, creating a tangled web of malice. Some sought to diminish her influence over the villagers, hoping that by humiliating her or undermining her work, they could reclaim authority. Others were driven by a more personal grievance, jealousy of her skills, of the quiet awe she inspired, and of the subtle ease with which she moved through life's challenges. "If we can make her stumble even once," whispered a young man whose own attempts at leadership had been ignored, "we might finally prove she is mortal like the rest of us." They shared anecdotes of minor mistakes, exaggerated them, and imagined ways to magnify her suffering, all while disguising their plots behind masks of civility. The plotting was never straightforward. They tested the waters with small acts of cruelty first, each as subtle as it was deliberate. Bread was left sour, though she had baked it with care. Herbs were contaminated, yet she managed to find remedies for neighbors who fell ill from the sabotage. Small tools went missing, forcing her to repair or improvise in ways that, though unnoticed by most, were watched closely by those who wished to see her falter. The failure to break her, however, only fueled their frustration. "She thrives on adversity," they murmured, eyes narrowing as she moved through the village, helping without complaint, smiling without arrogance. The envy extended beyond personal failure into fear, for the villagers realized that Isla's abilities gave her subtle power. She could sense ailments before they worsened, anticipate shortages, and guide travelers safely through treacherous paths. She did not wield her influence to command obedience or sow discord, yet the very fact that she could was enough to unsettle those whose own authority was limited. Some feared that her gifts might one day expose secrets, reveal misdeeds, or render them irrelevant. The more they whispered, the more their plans solidified into concrete intentions. If they could not match her skill or win the admiration she inspired, they would remove her from the equation entirely. Greed and malice intertwined in their minds. The idea that someone could thrive without seeking power or wealth while they struggled gnawed at their patience. One villager, whose own son had been apprenticed to Isla to learn herbcraft, complained bitterly about the boy's adoration of her, insisting he should instead be learning from a man with proper authority. Another woman, frustrated that her garden never yielded herbs as lush and potent as Isla's, whispered that the girl must be aided by unnatural forces. "She has no right to our respect or attention," they muttered. "She must be taught her place." They began to plan subtle ways to harm her reputation and health, envisioning acts that would humiliate or weaken her, each step cloaked in the guise of helping the village or maintaining tradition. They debated over methods that would not seem overtly cruel, for direct action risked inciting the villagers who loved and trusted Isla. Their words dripped with resentment. A little misfortune here, a small inconvenience there, and she will see that even the purest heart can bleed under pressure. Despite their plotting, Isla remained unaware of the full extent of the malice swirling around her. Her days continued in gentle rhythm, tending herbs, assisting the sick, baking bread, guiding travelers, and moving through the village with quiet grace. She offered kindness freely, untouched by the growing resentment, and her virtue became an unspoken challenge to the schemers. No matter what tricks they devised, she persisted. And in that persistence lay the foundation for the coming reckoning, a reckoning born from envy, malice, and greed, and countered by the extraordinary power of her patience, skill, and inherent virtue. Even as the seeds of envy were sown and nurtured in the shadows, the village watched Isla move through her days like sunlight on the hills, persistent, nourishing, and unyielding. Every whisper of malice, every secretive glance, every plotted act only underscored the contrast between their bitterness and her enduring grace. The stage was set, not for her downfall, but for a confrontation that would reveal the truth of her strength, the folly of envy, and the eventual justice that awaited those who sought to harm the innocent. The resentment that had quietly simmered in the village for months now took a sharper, darker turn. In the dim light of a secluded hut, the conspirators gathered, their faces taut with greed and malice. The leader, a stern man whose own family had seen repeated misfortune while Isla's star rose steadily, laid out the plan with meticulous care. "Tonight," he said, voice low and deliberate, "we ensure that she will rise no more. No more admiration, no more whispered thanks, no more guidance to the travelers and sick. She will eat as she always does and never rise again." The others nodded, some with quiet hesitation, others with zeal that bordered on cruelty. Each conspirator had witnessed her influence, the subtle respect she commanded without ever asking for it, and each felt a sting of inadequacy that had metastasized into envy. Their previous petty tricks, spoiling herbs, sowing minor inconveniences, had failed to shake her resolve. Now, with the village asleep and the moon high in a cloudless sky, they believed they had found the perfect solution: poison hidden in the bread she baked herself. It would be subtle, undetectable, and final. They moved with an almost ceremonial caution. The poison, a dark, viscous concoction they had obtained from a traveling herbalist, was placed in a small vial, its contents glinting faintly in the candlelight. The man who held it felt a rush of sinister pride, imagining Isla's demise and the immediate elevation of their own status in the village. He did not consider, nor did he care, that in doing so they were corrupting their own souls, binding themselves to the consequences of greed and cruelty. "She will eat," he whispered, more to himself than anyone else, "and the village will see that her miracles were illusions." As they prepared the bread, their hands moved with deliberate care, folding the deadly liquid into the dough as if it were a sacred ritual. The warmth of the oven, the scent of fresh yeast, and the soft glow of the candles contrasted sharply with the dark intent behind their actions. They marveled at their own cleverness, convinced that nothing could protect her now. Each conspirator took turns handling the dough, smoothing it, shaping it, and pressing it into forms that would be baked to perfection. Their confidence was palpable. They believed in the inevitability of their plan. They spoke in hushed tones about Isla's reputation, each comment steeped in jealousy. "She smiles too easily," said one woman, brushing flour from her hands, "and the villagers follow her every word. We must remind them that we too deserve respect." Another added, "She dares to teach the sick and the lost without permission. Tonight the lesson will be taught differently. Silence is the only justice she deserves." Every word, every gesture reinforced their shared conviction that this act of poison was not merely necessary but just. The conspirators timed their plan with precision. They knew Isla would rise early to bake bread, as was her routine, and they had manipulated circumstances to ensure she would use the flour and ingredients they had prepared. Hidden in plain sight, the deadly mixture would become part of her daily creation, and the village would wake to a tragedy seemingly accidental. Their confidence was intoxicating, a heady blend of fear, envy, and self-righteousness. They believed the poison would not just end her life but erase her influence entirely, leaving the village and themselves free from her overshadowing presence. Even as they executed their plan, small doubts fluttered at the edges of their minds. Was it truly right to harm one so gentle? Could a village survive if cruelty became its currency? They pushed these thoughts aside, rationalizing that Isla's strength and skill had made her untouchable, and now they would simply balance the scales. The poison, they convinced themselves, was a necessary correction in a world that had grown too favorable to the innocent and the virtuous. They left the bread where they knew Isla would find it, carefully masking any sign of their intervention. Every step was calculated, every glance filled with anticipation. They imagined the moment she would bite into her creation and falter, her light extinguished, her hands no longer tending to herbs, no longer baking, no longer guiding the villagers. "Tonight, the village learns," whispered the leader, "that no one escapes the consequences of their power." Yet beneath their confidence, the air carried a subtle tension, almost imperceptible. Outside, the wind rustled through trees, and the faint hoot of an owl seemed to pierce the secrecy of their plot. Still they pressed on, convinced that their plan was flawless, that the poison was perfect, that the end of Isla's kindness, wisdom, and influence was imminent. In their minds, the village would awaken to an empty space where virtue once thrived, and they would step into the light of authority they had long desired. Little did they know that their dark ambition, though meticulously executed, had underestimated the very forces Isla carried with her. Their greed and malice, folded into the poison loaf, would encounter something far older, far more potent than themselves. What they perceived as their final act of cunning would instead awaken a chain of consequences that no envy, no cruelty, no secretive planning could contain. As they departed, satisfied that their work was done, the night held its breath. The bread, now resting in Isla's hands, seemed ordinary, innocent, yet the faint glimmer of an unseen force hovered around it. The conspirators, confident and blind to the protection she carried within her skill and heart, could not yet perceive that the act intended to harm her would, in fact, become a turning point, one that would reflect their own malice back upon them, in ways both immediate and extraordinary. Isla rose before dawn, her hands moving almost instinctively as she prepared the morning bread. The kitchen was filled with the gentle light of first sunbeams, glinting on the worn wooden surfaces that had witnessed countless days of her care. She moved with precision, kneading the dough with rhythmic patience, her fingers pressing and folding as she whispered silent prayers for the villagers she so often helped. Unbeknownst to her, the poison hidden by the envious conspirators had already mingled with her ingredients, a shadowy thread of malice threaded through the flour and yeast. Despite this, the bread felt different beneath her hands. The dough seemed to respond to her touch, warming slightly where she pressed, as if it recognized the gentleness of her intentions. She had no knowledge of protective magic, no incantations passed down from elder herbs or secret teachings. Yet her care alone suffused the bread with a subtle, almost sentient energy. Each pinch of salt, each measured spoon of water, seemed to awaken something in the mixture. The herbs she added, rosemary for clarity, thyme for strength, and a touch of lavender for calm, did more than impart flavor. They carried her essence, a quiet harmony that unknowingly countered the dark intentions folded within the poison. As Isla shaped the loaves, her mind wandered to the villagers. She thought of the sick child she had visited the day before, of the baker's wife who had struggled with a bad knee, of the old miller who never complained despite aches that slowed him down. Her heart brimmed with hope and care, and the dough seemed to mirror this. The herb's natural energy pulsed softly through the bread, mingling with her gentle resolve, forming a protective aura that extended far beyond the kitchen. It was as though the bread itself recognized the malice infused within it and quietly began its own silent defense. She placed the loaves into the warm oven, the heat coaxing the yeast to rise and the crust to brown. The kitchen filled with the comforting aroma of baking bread, a scent so rich and homey that it seemed to push back against the darkness waiting outside. The conspirators, watching from hidden corners and hoping for triumph, could sense nothing unusual. They had counted on fear and silence to rule, but the bread's response to Isla's care was subtle yet powerful, something invisible yet undeniable. As the loaves baked, small hints of the reversal began to emerge. Steam rose from the oven, curling into faint shapes that seemed almost alive, tracing gentle arcs as if whispering warnings. One of the conspirators reached for a stray crumb that had fallen to the floor, thinking it harmless. His fingers brushed it, and a faint tingle ran up his arm, like the first spark of frost on skin. He jerked back, uncertain, as if some unseen force had made contact. Another, peering into the oven, noticed a shimmer across the bread's crust, almost like light refracted through a hidden crystal. It was subtle, easy to dismiss, but those attuned to malice felt a growing unease, a sense that what they had placed so carefully into the bread might not obey them as planned. Isla herself remained unaware, continuing her work with gentle devotion. She brushed flour from her hands and hummed a quiet tune, a melody learned in childhood that always seemed to bring clarity and calm. The song, woven into the motions of her baking, further activated the protective energy hidden in her herbs. Each note resonated with care and compassion, a counterpoint to the malicious scheme designed to harm her. Even the very air in the kitchen seemed to hum in response, vibrating with a quiet pulse that shielded the bread from the poison's intent. The loaves emerged golden and fragrant, steam rising in a gentle haze that filled the room with warmth. To any ordinary observer, it was simply bread baked with skill and love, yet beneath the surface, the natural magic coursing through the herbs and Isla's spirit had begun to neutralize the poison. The harmful substance, meant to harm and destroy, reacted to the purity of her intent. It did not vanish entirely, but it twisted in subtle ways, forming sharp but harmless projections of energy, foreshadowing the eventual justice that would befall those who had sought to hurt her. When she carried the bread to the village square, her steps light and steady, there was a faint sense of anticipation in the air. Villagers paused in their morning chores, sensing something unusual without knowing why. The gold dust of sunlight filtered through the trees, casting long shadows, yet it felt oddly protective, as if the day itself had conspired to guard her. She offered loaves with a smile, careful to greet each person with warmth, unaware that the bread carried more than nourishment. It carried a quiet, unseen strength that would defend her in ways no human eye could predict. Even as some of the conspirators waited to witness her humiliation, the bread subtly responded. The energy contained within it, a combination of her care, her herbs, and the inherent magic of the natural world, began to push back against the malevolent force. The poisoned loaves seemed to pulse faintly as if alive, warning those with ill intent that their actions would not go unchallenged. Their confidence wavered ever so slightly, a flicker of unease that hinted at the reversal soon to come. By the time Isla set the bread on the village square's stone counter, the magic had fully activated, forming a quiet shield around her and the loaves. Her gentle care, her harmony with nature, and her pure intentions had transformed what was meant to harm into something potent, something alive, something protective. The stage was set, the day prepared for the reversal of malice, yet Isla herself remained blissfully unaware, humming her tune and offering bread to those who approached with open hearts. The conspirators' plot, meticulously planned and darkly confident, had begun to unravel silently. The herbs whispered their allegiance, the dough remembered the touch of a careful hand, and the energy woven into the bread glimmered faintly, a promise of the justice yet to come. In this moment, the simple act of preparing bread became an act of quiet resistance, of unseen magic, and of protection that no envy or poison could entirely defeat. The conspirators shifted uneasily around the table, their confidence still faintly intact despite the subtle unease that had already begun to creep over them. One of them, a tall man with a sly grin, reached forward first, eager to demonstrate courage, or perhaps to mock Isla's perceived helplessness. He broke off a piece of the warm bread, the crust flaking lightly between his fingers. The aroma, normally comforting, now seemed to carry a strange edge, almost as if the bread itself recognized the intent behind the bite. As he brought the morsel to his lips, a faint tremor ran through him. The crowd, mostly unaware of the plot's hidden danger, watched curiously. Isla stood serenely, her hands folded lightly in front of her, her expression calm, almost detached. The man chewed slowly at first, savoring the taste, or so he believed. Then, with a sudden jerk of his head, he froze, a strangled sound escaping his throat. His mouth, which moments ago had seemed to enjoy the bread, now felt as though it was filled with something sharp and cruel. Tiny, pointed thorns had erupted across his tongue and the roof of his mouth, pricking and piercing with relentless intensity. He gagged and clawed at his own face, eyes wide in terror, as the pain intensified with every frantic movement. The heat of the day seemed to surge into his veins, mingling with the sting of the thorns, creating an unbearable combination that left him reeling on the spot. The other conspirators recoiled at the sudden eruption of chaos. Whispers turned to gasps and then to frantic exclamations. "What's happening?" one cried, almost tripping over his own feet as he stumbled backward. Another pressed a hand to his mouth, only to feel the prickling spread, tiny shards embedding themselves where his skin met the sharp points. Panic rippled outward, infecting even those who had not yet tasted the bread. The air seemed charged with tension, as if the bread itself had awakened to defend its maker. Isla's calm presence only intensified the effect. She did not move to intervene, did not scream, did not even flinch. Her serenity acted like a channel through which the protective energy flowed, making the thorn's emergence precise, targeted, and just. Each thorn, each sting, was a reflection of the intent behind the poison, a punitive response carefully measured to strike only those whose hearts harbored malice. The crowd began to murmur in fear and awe, witnessing the reversal of harm in real time. The man on the ground writhed, trying to spit the bread from his mouth, only to feel the thorns bite deeper with each motion. He fell to his knees, hands clawing at his own cheeks and lips, the taste of iron and fire flooding his senses. The villagers, some horrified, some incredulous, stepped back instinctively, creating a wide circle of space around the unfolding scene. Even the birds in the square seemed to flutter higher, disturbed by the violent shiver running through the conspirator's body. Another conspirator, emboldened by the first suffering, or perhaps foolishly believing he could endure, grabbed a piece of the bread and bit. The moment the crust met his teeth, a similar sensation struck him, but this time the thorns seemed sharper, more numerous. He gagged, twisting and turning, stumbling into a small cart and sending apples rolling across the cobblestones. His companions, now fully panicked, tried to intervene, only to feel the thorns sting bite at their own hands when they touched him, a cruel reminder that the punishment was not limited to the initial act. Panic escalated, a wave of chaos sweeping through the square. The crowd shrank back instinctively, creating a semicircle around the table where the scene unfolded. Yet Isla remained untouched, her serene posture unbroken. She did not revel in their suffering, but neither did she interfere. Her quiet dignity, her innate harmony with the natural magic embedded in the bread, ensured that justice was precise and inevitable. The man who had taken the first bite finally dropped to the ground, spitting and gagging, tears streaming from his eyes. The thorns, though painful, did not maim permanently. They acted as a lesson, a mirror to the cruelty he had intended to inflict. The punishment was immediate and undeniable, leaving no room for denial or excuses. His companions now understood the gravity of their actions, fear etching itself onto every line of their faces. A hushed awe fell over the village square. People began to whisper, eyes darting from Isla to the fallen conspirators. Some whispered prayers, others shook their heads in disbelief, and a few brave souls muttered words of admiration for the girl whose simple acts of kindness had transformed into a force no malice could overcome. The thorns were a symbol, a message that ill intent carries consequences beyond human comprehension. The conspirators scrambled backward, some clutching their throats and mouths, others writhing on the ground. Their jeers, their smug confidence, and their plotting had been shattered with the first bite, replaced by raw terror. Yet Isla, as she continued to move among the villagers offering smiles and gentle gestures, radiated the same warmth that had always characterized her. The bread, a supposed tool of harm, had revealed itself to be a vessel of protection and justice, a testament to the harmony between her skill, intent, and the unseen forces she had always respected. By the time the last bite had been forced upon a conspirator, the square had fallen into a tense quiet. The villains of the village were left trembling, their plans undone, their confidence shattered, and their bodies stung by a force they could neither see nor fully understand. Meanwhile, Isla's gentle presence and unwavering kindness remained unscathed, her integrity and moral strength underscored by the very magic that sought to protect her. The village square, once alive with the chatter of daily life, had fallen into a tense hush. A heavy, almost electric stillness hovered in the air as Isla stood amidst the crowd, her presence calm and unwavering. The conspirators, those who had sought to harm her with poisoned bread, were now writhing and staggering, clutching their mouths and hands, faces pale with shock and pain. The thorns had done their work, piercing just enough to teach them the consequences of cruelty, yet leaving no permanent injury. Their suffering was a lesson, a mirror reflecting the malice that had long festered in their hearts. Isla's expression, serene and unbroken, radiated an inner power that was both comforting and formidable. Her eyes, gentle yet sharp, scanned the square with quiet awareness. There was no satisfaction, no gleeful malice in her gaze, only the calm assurance of one who knows that justice, when executed through virtue and wisdom, needs no forceful hand. The villagers who had gathered at the edges of the square were transfixed. Some had seen the thorns emerge, others only witnessed the sudden panic and distress of the antagonists. All, however, felt the weight of Isla's presence and the undeniable truth that she was no ordinary girl. The first conspirator, the tall man who had bitten into the bread first, sank to his knees, his trembling body a testament to both fear and awe. He tried to speak, but words failed him, choked by the lingering sting of the magical thorns. His companions fared little better. The second and third conspirators staggered back, some clutching nearby carts or posts for support, their faces twisted in expressions of disbelief. Every movement, every attempt to regain composure, was met with the subtle precision of the thorns' magic, a force that responded to their intent and malice. They were trapped not by physical strength, but by the immutable power of moral balance. Isla moved slowly, deliberately, her hands lightly brushing the edges of the table where the bread had been served. She did not speak. She did not gesture. Her mere presence seemed to calm the air, redirecting the energy around her and allowing the thorns' magic to dissipate gradually once the lesson had been imparted. The crowd, once fearful of the conspirators' cruelty, began to understand the nature of what had transpired. The bread, meant as a vehicle of harm, had been transformed by Isla's integrity and inner virtue into an instrument of justice. The villagers began murmuring amongst themselves, astonishment and reverence mingling in their voices. She did not strike them herself, one whispered, and yet they are undone. Another nodded, eyes wide. It is as if the bread itself knew right from wrong. Slowly, comprehension spread through the square. Isla's calm, her unwavering kindness, had not only protected her, it had allowed the natural and mystical forces she respected to act in defense of justice. Some of the children, who had been watching with wide eyes, stepped closer to Isla, drawn by a sense of safety and wonder. She gave them a gentle nod, her serenity reassuring them that the world, while often cruel, could also respond to virtue with protection. She did not boast. She did not demand recognition. Her triumph was quiet, carried in the way she held herself, the way her calm gaze settled the nerves of those who had only come to see her humiliated. The thorns had served their purpose, but they had not corrupted her. They had only clarified her power, the harmony between intention and consequence. The conspirators, meanwhile, were beginning to comprehend the magnitude of their failure. One staggered to his feet, lips quivering, eyes darting around the square, and realized that their plan to humiliate Isla had not only failed, it had exposed their own malice. The magical thorns had been precise, targeting their greed and cruelty while leaving the innocent untouched. The pain they had felt was a reflection of their inner corruption, a lesson encoded in the very bread they had hoped would harm her. Panic and humiliation were etched into their expressions as they attempted to flee, though their movements remained awkward, constrained by the lingering discomfort of the thorns and the psychological weight of their public failure. Isla's calm did not waver. She walked slowly through the square, her steps deliberate but unhurried, her presence commanding without force. Villagers stepped aside respectfully, some bowing their heads in acknowledgement, others simply watching in silent awe. Even those who had previously whispered against her, fueled by suspicion or fear, felt the undeniable authority emanating from her serene demeanor. She carried no weapons, wielded no visible magic, and yet the moral and mystical power that surrounded her was evident to all. As she passed the table where the bread had been served, the thorns gradually disappeared, leaving only the memory of their sting and the deep impression of justice served. The conspirators, now trembling, were forced to recognize that their intentions had backfired spectacularly. The lesson was clear: harm intended for one rooted in virtue would always rebound upon the malicious. Isla's triumph was not in vengeance, but in the alignment of justice with compassion. The villagers' reverence grew as they witnessed her composed triumph. Mothers held their children closer, whispers of awe spreading from mouth to mouth. Elders, who had once doubted or envied her skill, now nodded in silent acknowledgement, recognizing that true power lay not in cruelty or intimidation, but in the harmony between intention, action, and ethical strength. The square, once a stage for potential humiliation, had transformed into a testament to the protective and corrective power of virtue. Isla finally paused in the center of the square. She raised her head, eyes scanning the crowd, offering a gentle smile that conveyed neither pride nor arrogance, but quiet affirmation. The villagers understood instinctively that she was not merely lucky or clever. She was in tune with forces beyond mere sight, forces that responded to her integrity and moral clarity. The thorns, the reversal of harm, had been a signal that justice aligned with virtue would always manifest, even against overwhelming malice. By the time the sun began to rise higher, casting warm light over the square, the conspirators had retreated, some limping, others shielding their mouths from residual discomfort, all marked indelibly by the lesson they had received. Isla remained unscathed, serene and dignified. Her triumph was absolute, yet it required no display of anger or retaliation. Her calm had guided the unfolding of events, ensuring that justice was served with precision, and that no unnecessary cruelty marred the outcome. The villagers, now fully aware of her moral and mystical power, began to speak her name with a mix of respect, reverence, and awe. Children would whisper of the girl whose calm could turn malice into harmless lessons, and adults would remember the day when the bread that was meant to harm became a conduit for justice. Isla's serene triumph was a living testament to the principle that true power lies not in the strength of arms or the sharpness of tongue, but in the unwavering alignment of virtue, wisdom, and calm resolve. Even as the square emptied and daily life resumed, the story of the poisoned bread, the thorns, and Isla's composure lingered in the minds of all who had witnessed it.